Hi everyone, my name is Jane and I'm a volunteer with Gainesville Girls Rock Camp. Today I'm presenting a workshop on anti-racism for kids. Before we get started, I do want to give a content warning about the material in this workshop. We're going to be talking about race, racism, and white supremacy, and if you think that kind of material will be triggering or upsetting for you, I recommend that you skip this video. I also want to briefly talk about where the content of this workshop comes from. The majority of the material we'll be talking about is either directly quoted from or adapted from Ibram X. Kendi's books, How to Be an Anti-Racist and Anti-Racist Baby. Any supplemental materials are cited within the presentation. Let's get started. So here we have a quote from feminist and activist Angela Davis. She says that, quote, "In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist." Today, we're going to talk about what that means. But before we do that, let's imagine a hypothetical scenario. You look out your window and see that your neighbor's house is on fire. What do? Here we have two choices. In choice A, you think it's a real shame that the fire is burning your neighbor's house down, but you decide to ignore it and have a snack before bed. In choice B, you call the fire department. Think about your answer because we're going to come back to it in a little bit. Let's talk about some definitions. When we talk about race, we're talking about categories that society places people into on the basis of their physical characteristics like skin color. When we talk about racism, we mean the disrespect, harm, and mistreatment of people of color based on made-up ideas that white people deserve to be in charge and treated better. Racism is related to white supremacy, which is the belief that white people are better and deserve more than other racial groups. Now that we have some definitions down, we can talk about recognizing racism. Sometimes racism takes the form of racist ideas. A racist idea is any idea that says one racial group is superior or inferior to another racial group in any way. For example, someone might say that, quote, "this race is more well-behaved," or, quote, "this race is more dangerous." But where do racist ideas come from? Racist ideas are related to racist policies. In fact, racist ideas are often created to either defend racist policies or to explain the effects of racist policies. According to Ibram X. Kendi, a racist policy is, quote, "any written or unwritten rule that creates or continues racial inequity." Let's look at an example of the relationship between racist policies and ideas. For most of American history, colleges and universities did not admit non-white students. This meant that it was a million times easier for white people to become doctors or lawyers. And when people saw all of their doctors and lawyers were whites, racist ideas about intelligence and work ethic were reinforced. Some of you may have heard the term white privilege and wonder where that fits into all of this. While racism puts people of color at a disadvantage, it also puts white people at an unfair advantage. White and white-passing people are not always aware of the privileges that they receive for simply being white. If you are white or white-passing, ask yourself questions like, have I ever been followed or harassed while shopping? How often do my history classes teach about people who look like me? How often am I the only white person in a group? Think about your answers and how they relate to the idea of white privilege. You might be thinking, this is really good information, but I'm not racist. But as Ibram X. Kendi reminds us, quote, "there is no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it is anti-racist." Think about the scenario from earlier. Suppose that you didn't call the fire department. Even if you didn't want the fire to burn the house down, you didn't do anything to stop it. If you called the fire department, you actively did something to fight the fire. You took an active stance against the house fire. This example can relate to anti-racism. Disagreeing with what the fire was doing didn't stop the house from burning down. Disagreeing with racism doesn't stop racism from hurting people. Taking action against the fire stopped the house from burning down. And only taking action against racism as an anti-racist can stop racism from hurting people. So what exactly is anti-racism? We can define anti-racism as a collection of policies and ideas that actively support racial equity rather than white supremacy. But that can be a little abstract, so let's talk about steps we can take to be anti-racists. For starters, you can move beyond sayings like, I'm not racist or I don't see color. Seeing how racial groups are treated differently is the only way that we can replace racist policies with anti-racist ones. Educating yourself on race and racism is important work. Don't just focus on racism, look at resources that celebrate the success and joy of others. And share what you learn with the people in your life. You can also reflect on any racist ideas that you might hold or express. It is important to remember that you are not a bad person for having racist thoughts. What matters is that you strive to replace those thoughts with anti-racist thoughts. One way to work on this could be journaling. It is also important to speak up against racism when you can do so safely. For example, if a friend makes a racist joke, call them out on it. And if you don't feel safe to speak up, talk to an adult you trust about what you saw or heard. I actually have a really cool example of how a 12-year-old kid spoke up when she saw something racist going on. In the game Roblox, kids were darkening the skin of their avatars because they were trying to support the Black Lives Matter movement. A girl named Garvey saw this and made a video about the racist history of blackface and why there were better ways to show support to the movement. It's important to remember that even as a kid, you have the power to educate others. And finally, you can even be an activist as a kid. There are all sorts of things you can do. You can educate others, you can fundraise for anti-racist nonprofits, you can organize and participate in protests, and you can even start or join an anti-racist organization at your school. That's it for this workshop. In the coming weeks, Gainesville Girls Rock Camp will be releasing a list of educational resources on race and anti-racism for different age groups, so keep an eye out for that. And remember that an anti-racist future is possible. We just need your help to make it happen.